You've probably heard the headlines, seen the chatter about trade discussions between Malaysia and the U.S. recently.
Right.
But like always, there's usually more going on beneath the surface, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's never just the headlines.
Okay, so let's get into it. Today we're doing a deep dive into these initial stages, these trade negotiations. We're mostly basing this on what Malaysia's Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry, MITI, has been saying.
Yeah, our mission here is pretty clear, really. We want to understand, what's actually been discussed so far in these early talks.
Okay.
And try to figure out what the key sticking points or focus areas might be going forward and why it all matters, really, for the bigger economic picture.
Right.
So yeah, main source is the MITI minister's comments, plus some related economic data for context.
Got it. So where are we exactly? It feels like this is just the very beginning, yeah.
Precisely. You've hit it right there. The minister's own words suggest this first phase was, well, mostly exploratory.
Exploratory.
And engagement, I think, was the term used, basically feeling each other out, understanding intentions, setting some broad parameters.
So does that mean no big news yet, like no immediate tariff cuts announced or anything like that?
Exactly. No firm deals on tariffs, no binding agreements made in this initial round. And something else to note. As of early May, around the 5th, I believe, the Malaysian government was still getting approval from Parliament for MITI to actually proceed with, more detailed formal talks.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. You need the green light domestically before you can really negotiate seriously.
Definitely.
Now, one of the big reasons these talks are happening, I gather, is the trade imbalance. The U.S. has been pretty vocal about that, haven't they?
They have, yes. That's been a significant point for the U.S. for a while, this trade surplus Malaysia runs with them. It was the reason, or at least the stated reason, for putting that 24% countervailing duty on some Malaysian goods initially.
24%. And what was the logic there?
Well, interestingly, that 24% was apparently half of a calculated figure, something like 47%.
47.
Yeah, quite something. That 47% was meant to represent the difference in value between Malaysian exports to the U.S. and U.S. exports back to Malaysia. Basically a way to try and level the playing field as they see it, making those goods more expensive in the U.S.
Wow, okay. A potential 47% gap, that's huge. But what's the Malaysia side saying? Has that surplus figure stayed the same?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. According to Malaysia, and the minister highlighted this, that surplus has actually come down quite a bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he mentioned a drop from around USD 40 billion back in 2021.
40 billion, okay.
Down to roughly USD 25.1 billion in 2024. So quite a significant reduction.
25 billion, that is a big drop.
It is. And the thinking is maybe this suggests market forces are already kind of correcting that imbalance the U.S. was worried about, which could change the tone of the talks.
That's a fascinating point. Is there data to back up that trend, that decrease?
Well, getting precise official figures for the exact bilateral balance for that exact period can be tricky. But if you look at the broader data, say the volume of U.S. imports from Malaysia from 1985 up to 2023.
Okay.
You see an overall upward trend, definitely, but there are peaks. And importantly, there was a noticeable dip in 2022 and 2023, and that seems to be continuing into 2024. So yes, it does seem to align with what the minister was saying about the surplus shrinking.
Okay, so the gap is narrowing. Now, this is really interesting. Does this shrinking surplus mean the U.S. might be maybe a little less aggressive on the tariff front in the next round of talks?
It's certainly plausible. You'd think a smaller imbalance might make the U.S. Less insistent on keeping those high duties.
Right.
And Malaysia's goal, they've said, is ideally to get those tariffs down to zero. But the minister was clear that would require a, quote, win-win situation. Needs to work for both sides.
A win-win. Okay, so tariffs are one major piece.
Yeah.
But I've also heard the U.S. is pushing on other things, these non-tariff barriers. What's that about?
Absolutely. That's a big focus for the U.S. Non-tariff barriers. Think of things beyond just import taxes.
Like red tape.
Exactly. It could be complex customs procedures, maybe specific regulations or policies that kind of protect domestic industries without using a direct tax, stuff that still makes it harder to trade.
Okay.
And one area that often comes up in this context is agriculture and food security. Lots of countries have protections there.
Yeah, agriculture always seems sensitive in trade deals. Is Malaysia showing any flexibility there? Any sign they might open things up a bit?
Well, surprisingly, perhaps, yes. Malaysia has apparently indicated some potential willingness to open up some agricultural sectors to U.S. imports.
Interesting. Any idea which ones?
They haven't named specifics publicly, but The source material we looked at mentioned things like potential U.S. exports of corn and beef as examples.
Corned beef.
So it suggests some flexibility, but, the details of how much in which sectors, that's going to be a major negotiation point down the line, you can bet.
No doubt. Okay, so tariffs, agriculture. Now there's this other really critical area, economic security, technology safeguards.
Yeah.
This sounds complicated.
It is. This could be the trickiest part, arguably. The U.S. is expressing real concern about sensitive, high-end technology potentially leaking from Malaysia.
Leaking. Where to?
Two countries of concern. China was specifically mentioned in this context. The worry isn't just about, say, one batch of chips. It's broader. It's about the security of the whole tech supply chain, making sure strategic tech doesn't end up with rivals.
Right. I think I heard something about this.
Yeah.
Wasn't there an issue involving Singapore recently?
Yeah.
With some computer chips?
Yes. Exactly. That's highly relevant here. There was an investigation in Singapore about sophisticated NVIDIA GPUs, graphics processors, being re-exported to China.
Okay.
And there's a concern that Malaysia might have been, perhaps unknowingly, a transit point. That whole incident has really put the U.S. on alert about potential loopholes in the region. And it could, unfortunately, lead to a sort of negative mark for both Singapore and Malaysia with the U.S. Department of Commerce regarding tech security.
Oof, yeah. That's not good. How's Malaysia responding to these concerns?
Well, the MIT minister himself has acknowledged it's an issue. He stated clearly they need to find solid ways to assure the U.S. that these kinds of leaks won't happen or won't continue.
And this is crucial for their own plans too, right? Like becoming a data center hub?
Absolutely critical. Malaysia has big ambitions there, becoming a major hub in Southeast Asia, but that needs access to exactly these kinds of advanced GPUs. So access could definitely be tied into how well they address these security concerns in the trade talks. There's even a rumor, just a rumor, mind you, that the U.S. might consider tweaking some tech export restrictions for Malaysia, sort of as a carrot.
Leverage.
Potentially leverage in exchange for stronger guarantees on tech security and maybe other things like market access.
Fascinating. It's all tied together. So who's actually going to be leading the Malaysian team in these next crucial talks?
It's expected to be the Deputy Secretary General of Trade at MITI. Mr. Moss is the name mentioned.
Mr. Moss. Okay, good to know.
Right.
Now, just shifting gears slightly, let's look at the U.S. economy. Those Q1 2025 GDP numbers came out, showed a small dip, negative growth. How does that fit into all this?
Yeah, that's a really relevant piece of context. The U.S. Q1 GDP for 2025 did show a slight contraction, minus 0.3%.
Minus 0.3. Okay.
But the main reason cited was actually a big jump in imports compared to exports, and a likely driver for that import surge. Businesses anticipating these very tariffs we're talking about.
Stocking up before prices potentially go up.
Precisely. Trying to get goods in before potential new duties hit. So that negative 0.3% shows a contraction, sure, but the fact it's linked to imports responding to trade policy talk, it shows how interconnected it all is.
So it doesn't automatically mean the U.S. is sliding into recession then?
Not necessarily, no. Usually you need 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth or a much sharper downturn for the official recession label. Most economists seem to expect Q2 won't be worse than Q1.
But if it was significantly worse?
Well, yeah, if Q2 came in really bad, say minus 1.3% or something, that would definitely worry investors, no question.
Okay, and how does this U.S. economic picture, this slight dip, affect the trade talks and the tariff situation?
Well, there's still the potential for U.S. domestic inflation to rise because of tariffs. Depends how long the tensions last, what inventory levels are like.
Right.
If imports get more expensive due to duties, that cost eventually gets passed on, potentially pushing inflation up. So you've got this slight economic contraction, partly driven by tariff anticipation. Does that put more pressure on the U.S. to resolve things quickly or less? It's a complex dynamic to watch.
Definitely. Okay, so just to pull it all together then, these first talks were very much stage setting.
Correct.
No big deals yet.
Yeah.
But the main battlegrounds are clear. The trade imbalance, these non-tariff barriers, especially in agriculture, and this really crucial, maybe tricky issue of tech security.
Exactly. And while the U.S. still has concerns about the trade surplus, the fact that it has come down quite a bit recently, well, that might just create a bit more room for constructive talks ahead. Might. But that technology safeguard issue, assuring the U.S. about preventing leaks, that remains a really significant hurdle. Needs careful handling from both sides.
Yeah, it certainly does. This has been incredibly insightful. Thank you. It really makes you think. with global supply chains being so tangled and technology being so vital, how could the results of these talks, which seem bilateral, just Malaysia and the US, how could they ripple outwards, affect other countries, other industries you might be following? And what else, beyond just the tariffs and trade figures, might really decide if Malaysia achieves its big ambitions in tech and data centers? Lots to chew on there.
Definitely food for thought. It's a situation that bears close watching, for sure.